Did you want me to cheers you? Is that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
Tea glass cheers.
Um, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 8. As Jesus got into a boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a violent storm came up on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by waves, but he was asleep. They came and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." He said to them, "Why are you terrified, O you of little faith?" Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. The men were amazed and said, "What sort of man is this, whom even the winds and the sea obey?"
I always hear that reading, and it reminds me of. It was actually a YouTube video that we watched, but it was C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, and where he talks about there's three kinds of relationships that we have. We have a relationship, a personal relationship with God, or just a personal morality, right? Is that where he goes into it from? There's a relationship with our neighbor, and then there's a relationship as essentially a community leading towards God, or you could think of it as of all creation. And he goes into this colorful analogy of that. It's like you are in a boat, and you have to get to a certain destination. You have to go across, the ocean from Scotland to Canada, whatever. But it's not just you. You're in a fleet of boats, right? And so you and your fleet of boats have to navigate the seas to the right location. And he turns it into the story of, you could be a great sailor. You can be an awesome boatsman. You could keep your ship perfectly right. You can always, be floating where you need to be floating, and you can always be steering where you need to be steering, and stopping where you need to stop, and anchoring where you need to anchor. And that's that personal relationship, or that personal morality that you have, right? But if you run into your neighbors, then that really doesn't do a whole lot of good.
Or your neighbor runs into you.
Or your neighbor runs into you, right? Then you both have holes in your boat, and that doesn't really help a whole lot. And
I'm sinking.
Similarly, you can all be great navigators, you be great boatsmen, and you can make sure to not run into each other, but the whole fleet could end up in, Greenland. We went the wrong direction as a fleet, right? And then, of course, the third case is that, you could be in a great fleet that knows exactly where they're going, and you can make sure that none of the other boats run into each other, but if you have holes in your sails, then you can't keep up. And you end up, struggling to try to just maintain a straight course. So these are the three relationships. And so going into the gospel, that was a very long description.
It's okay.
I like to think of the gospel reading kind of almost as touching on a few of the different points, but I think more directly is in that, community relationship to God. Like, does the community of disciples were in a storm, and they were in fear of perishing. They were in fear of being turned over in this little boat in the middle of the sea. And Jesus just rebukes the wind. Says, forget about it. I got you covered. I know where we're going, right? The community has their eyes on Jesus. He's navigating for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful example of that. Now, I don't know. Is there anything else you
No.
I'm talking the whole time.
No, it's okay. I'll talk later.
Okay.
You talking. You're a good talker.
There's also this, you could get into the problems of, because ultimately what C.S. Lewis leads that to is that selfishness attacks all three sectors of that relationship. Selfishness is the thorn, or the crux of each one of those problems. You could have the disciples, say, well, I want to take over. I know exactly what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to lead. It's my way, right?
I've been catching fish for 20 years.
I've been doing this forever. I know what I'm doing, right? That would be a type of selfishness. Similarly, you could have, if you were, maybe you're a boatsman that particularly struggled with keeping your rudder clean. You tended to let things build up on your rudder, and so you had to intentionally clean your rudder all the time. Otherwise, it didn't really work well, and you weren't ever going straight, or it just slowed you down. Well, if you were that person, right, you don't just go up to your brother, who's also a sailor, and say, well, number one thing you have to do, keep your rudder clean. Don't worry about anything else. Keep your rudder clean. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe he doesn't have that problem. Maybe he has a problem with ballast. His ship tends to lean to one side always because he puts too many, kegs of ale in one side. I don't know. Maybe he has a different problem, right? Your advice doesn't really help him a whole lot. And that's that first relationship. It's a selfishness in that first relationship, which turns into almost, it's like a relativism. It's an ant. It's a relativism that my problems are everyone's problems, right?
Or even the same, right?
And in a way, we get fascinated with these kind of things, that my moral issues, or the ones that I care about, are the most important moral issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Or that
I need some tea.
not only that my issues are the only issue that matters, but that your issues don't matter. And I think that is the stumbling block, is to not look at that other person's boat and walk in their shoes for a little bit as they're like tilting over, about to sink,
Judging them. Well, you shouldn't be putting too much stuff on that side. Well, maybe they have to do that because of the way their boat is designed. I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get there's a judgment that unless you have, and of course the counter to that is solidarity, right? Living in someone else's boat, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think.
And I mean, this is a major issue that is causing horrible divides in our country, and they're divides over silly things, like going to mass during a pandemic, not going to mass during a pandemic, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, things that are so trivial in the large scheme of things when there's people dying. There's orphans, there's cancer, there's war,
Or even the fact that people are dying, there's been this unnatural fascination with death that has even gone so far to say, well, everyone's going to die, right? Don't worry about death. We're all going to die someday. And Death, where is your sting, right? Jesus didn't let the boat perish.
And just say, oh, they're going to die.
They're going to die, right? No. He stepped in and saved them, right?
Or Lazarus, he didn't just say, oh, well, he died. He was going to die anyway someday, so.
No, he healed, he saved. And then that went into the apostles doing the same in the Acts of the Apostles. Peter is accounted in the Acts of the Apostles as healing men with just his shadow, right? We are a church of healers. We are a healing church. We aren't a church that says, well, sorry, I mean, go to church, but you're going to die someday. And
so I was explaining it to the kids, like everyone has different risks that they're willing to take. And that is individual and families' choices that they make. Some people may feel fine not wearing a mask, when other people, that is huge. That is like a major issue for them. Same with going to church. Some people, like, that is a risk they're willing to take. And other people, it's not. And I was telling our kids, it's kind of like when you go into missions, okay? If you're a single and you're like, oh, I want to follow Jesus to the ends of the earth, and I'm going to die for him, okay? As a single, you're making that choice for yourself. But then once you get married, you both have to be on the same page. You both have to agree that this risk is worth taking, that this is something that you're both okay if things go wrong. And then once you bring children into that, it's more even further complicated, because as the parents, you have to decide what is the best for my children, because it's no longer just about me and Jason, it's about our children too.
And I think going into missions, we had that kind of judgment of, well, just go, right? Doesn't matter where you're going. Who cares if your kids suffer? Who cares, right? And then it took us a little bit of time to realize that you're placing a lot of burdens on your children that they didn't choose, right? There's a selfishness in being fearless. It's great to say, well, be fearless, don't worry about death, don't worry about persecution, but then it affects other people in your family or in your community. That's their cross to carry now, not yours.
And that's basically when that ship is starting to run into other ships, because that person's driving their course and they know where they want to go, but they're hitting innocent bystanders along the way, people who didn't choose that same path.
So there was this great example of when we were in Costa Rica. We went to this one Puebla. It was an hour and a half away from our main town, and they only had mass like once a month or something like that, right? So, and it was a little ranching community. And I remember going there, and the padre was up there talking about going to mass, and that it's a sin to miss mass, right? Here they have it once a month, okay? So what we were trying to encourage people to do was, go to another town, right? Go to some other mass on those weeks and travel, right? And eat out. This one lady stood up in the middle of the homily, and it made an impression on me, because this was a ranching town. It was almost all one or two families. And she said, if I leave my herd alone for an evening, they may not be there when I come back. There's dangers. We're in the middle of the rainforest, trying to ranch. There's all kinds of things that, harms that will happen, and people could just steal their herd, or they could just wander off and get lost, right? There's all kinds of things that would happen in the time of an hour, right? Their herd could literally wander an hour away. And I think it kind of stopped the Padre a little bit in his tracks, but it brought up a real interesting analogy for me of like, what kind of burdens do we place on people by telling them that by not going to Mass, they're sinning? Yes, we keep holy the Sabbath, but if we don't have Mass every week that is within, reasonable distance of them, or
we can afford to travel to,
or that we can afford to travel to,
and
or
still feed our families
at a time that they don't have to work. I mean, this is that same analogy. Well, obviously Mass is more important than your life, so quit your job. That's the only job they have. There is no other option, right? There's a little mercy involved there that we have to understand. We can't provide the answers, the moral answers to people that get through that kind of a situation. And then similarly, we've been sent quite a few suggestions by friends who are well-meaning that are trying to explain how the Eucharist is, healing, and that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of our Catholic faith, and that the Eucharist should be, every week. It's an obligation. We have been through a year where our kids spent a total of a month without their mom at home. And the scars that they have endured because of that are incapacitating at sometimes. They held them, they carry them very well, that they are there, right? There is a risk that we take by just going out to get a critical item every day. If we decide to go out of our house, we are taking a risk that very likely, if we would get sick, Jessica would be in the hospital for an extended time. And that would cause our kids to suffer. And that's not a suffering that they agreed to or signed up for. That's something we are putting on them in our own selfishness.
And it's something that can be prevented.
And so, yes, we are suffering. We are suffering, not
getting to receive Jesus,
not being able to go to Mass in person, in persona. And that's a cross that we are taking to protect our children.
And the children right here, the child.
We are trying to be very pro-family, pro-life in doing that. And so there's that decision that we are taking. And we can be judged for it by God. That's fine. But that is a decision that we make for our children. Similar that we decided to go into missions with our children. And we decided that we could protect them if we went to a third world country.
Because we traveled enough in the third world countries that we knew how to behave and how to protect our kids.
So.
But I think, ultimately it comes back down to that. Even if you were just a married couple, you didn't even have kids, and you felt that your husband or wife was in danger of getting sick from this, to choose their life is holy. It is pro-life. Just to choose your spouse,
And it's a sacrifice that you're making to simplify your life and to sit at home and basically quarantine yourself for an extended time, which is something we don't want to do, but we are sacrificing for our family.
And oftentimes it's save one life. All you have to do is save one life. And maybe that one life is a member of your family. So, yeah.
So we ask the Lord for the grace just to live in solidarity with those who do not have Mass every week, or even every month, or even once within a year. I'm just reminded of the Amazon Synod that happened not too long ago now. And then it was about this very topic, about people who could not go to Mass, and what were we as a church going to do for them. So I asked for the grace to be able to live in solidarity with them and to understand that their cross is extremely hard, but not judge them for what they do.
Yeah, I think judgment is a huge part for us, not to judge people based on what they feel is risky. If someone feels like they need to go and the risk is in their means, amen, go. If someone feels like they need to stay home and protect their family, amen, stay home. Like, let us be people who walk in one another's shoes and
lead each other to Christ as a fleet.
That should be our goal. Mine's empty.